Trump unveils fresh tariffs, a 100% rate on pharmaceuticals, raising concerns about drug shortages and price increases. President Trump's new product-specific tariffs set to take effect next week on 1st October. For more on this, let's speak to Deborah Elms, head of trade policy at the Hinrich Foundation. Deborah, thanks for making the time to join us. My colleague Henry is joining the conversation as well. Firstly, help us understand this new 100% tariff on pharmaceuticals. Mr. Trump has been threatening these levies for months now, but won't this just make certain drugs more difficult and expensive to buy for Americans? And won't this put patients at risk?
I think the answer to those questions is yes, but what Trump is clearly trying to do with the pharmaceutical bill especially is to ensure that domestic production of pharmaceuticals is now taking place. So he has already said, at least in the latest tweet, that if you are already building or have underway production facilities in the United States, you will be exempt from these 100% tariffs on patented products, pharmaceutical products in the U.S. But clearly that's going to result in higher prices for American consumers. Many products will not meet that criteria, or at least will not meet that criteria by next week. And so we will have price increases coming for U.S. patients.
Which countries would you say will be most affected by these pharma tariffs?
I think it's a little unclear because of the way the Trump administration has at least appears to be framing this, because you'll need to look at not just which products are imported from abroad that are branded, not generics, but also are those firms producing products domestically, even if it's not the same product. It's a little unclear, right? So if I make product A domestically but not product B, can I just declare my full line of pharmaceuticals are therefore exempt from this tariff? It's still unclear. But there are some products that are clearly going to be an issue. For example, Ozempic and Wegovy, which are the weight loss drugs, are currently all imported. There is a discussion about making them domestically. It hasn't happened yet. That could be a problem. Viagra, as I understand it, is 100% imported. There are generic substitutes that are available that would be zero tariffs. And so there'll be some really interesting consequences from this decision should it go forward next week.
Mm-hmm. And also, Deborah, what ripple effects do you see on global supply chains, and how might major pharmaceutical hubs like the EU, China and India respond to these tariffs?
Well, I think it's an interesting question because pharma is a globally integrated industry, much more so than a lot of other sectors because of the way that the scale economy works, because you need to make sure that you are manufacturing pharmaceutical products in facilities that meet quality requirements. You don't have them everywhere. And so you tend to isolate production of certain products in certain locations. This potentially upends a lot of that and requires firms to make less than optimal decisions about where they're going to manufacture products. And I think the question will be whether this makes any sense for the U.S. Does it make sense for U.S. patients? Does it make sense for global pharmaceutical companies to shift their investment strategies and their production location destinations based on Trump's current actions while in office?
You had said that most companies won't be able to shift by next week. So realistically, how long would it take to move manufacturing to the U.S.?
Well, I think we're trying to parse a very short tweet, but one thing that Trump said this time around was that if you have broken ground on production, then you could be exempt. And so I suggest that there will be a lot of pharmaceutical companies quickly grabbing a handful of shovels and digging a hole in the ground to declare themselves exempt from this latest set of tariffs. But I don't think that's actually going to solve the problem, because at any point, Trump in the future could say, well, actually, your facility isn't producing drugs yet, or it isn't producing enough drugs, and therefore you are now exempt. You are now required to pay these tariffs at 100%, potentially more. And so the uncertainty for the sector and, in fact, for all products being sent to the United States continues.
As you had mentioned, generic drugs aren't targeted with these tariffs. And so what do you think the impact could be on generic medicines? They're cheaper than the branded drugs. Why could they probably have a knock-on effect from these tariffs?
Well, I think the argument for exempting generics is that the margins on a generic product is so thin that if you had to put 100% tariff on a generic branded product, it would be unviable. And so therefore, we're not going to do that, I think would say the Trump administration. However, clearly you are at least you are manipulating the market in ways that I think are very interesting. Not every product is available in a generic formula. And even generic formula products often have branded products as well that are sold. And so I think we are looking for some serious disruptions in the pharmaceutical sector in the United States. We'll have to see what the impact will ultimately be, because a lot of patients in the U.S. get their products through Medicare or Medicaid, which is the government subsidized programs. Those prices might be different from what the retail price might be. We also have insurers that may or may not pay for certain products. We've already had a shift away from patented or branded products into generics. I think that will continue to accelerate. But again, as I said, new and innovative drugs that are not currently produced in the United States, that are imported from abroad, will not be available in the U.S. or will be available in the U.S. only at high costs until they reach the stage in which they become generics.
Well, Deborah, you mentioned that Americans might need to pay more for the drugs. So to what extent could these tariffs push up prices levels in the U.S., and how much might that factor into the Fed's future policy decisions?
Well, they certainly will increase prices. The question is by how much and how long the U.S. will continue to exempt generic pharmaceuticals. If the United States decides that generic pharmaceuticals are also eligible for tariff increases, whether it's at 100% or something lower, that also has an impact, of course, on the prices of medications in the United States. While this is going on, the U.S. is also looking to impose new tariffs for medical devices. That was announced yesterday. We will see when that case actually comes to fruition. But I would expect higher prices ahead for pharmaceuticals and pharmaceuticals with medical devices, which could include like injectables or any other kind of medicine, pharmaceutical products delivered through a device. I think the disruption caused to the U.S. domestic economy continues, especially for products like pharmaceuticals and healthcare products that are very important to a lot of Americans. And we'll see what is the appetite in the United States for pushback, even by Trump's supporters, who will find themselves suddenly facing much higher prices or potentially much higher prices for products that are literally life-saving.
Deborah, the U.S. Supreme Court is set to consider a challenge to Mr. Trump's use of emergency powers to justify these sweeping tariffs. How do you think this could play out? Could we expect a reversal on the tariffs, or will this be a prolonged legal battle?
So the case that's under investigation right now is on the use of emergency powers that Trump used for what he calls reciprocal tariffs. So those were first announced on April 2nd, and they apply to different countries, different rates. So Singapore, for example, has a 10% reciprocal rate. That is different from the sector-specific tariffs that we've just been discussing on pharmaceuticals. Those are in a different classification. Those are called national security tariffs. And those are not under review by the Supreme Court. So even if the Supreme Court rules against the administration later this year or early next year, we will still have these sector-specific tariffs in place. And so there's sort of at least two, and actually more than two, kinds of tariffs moving forward in the U.S. One of them under potential legal review and possible reversal, but the rest currently not under review legally and much more challenging, actually, to unwind, because once you've labeled something a national security problem, it's very hard for the court to then say, we disagree, that this is not actually about national security. And Congress is unlikely to do anything about it. And so those are going to be particularly sticky.
So with these being sticky, along with the pharmaceutical tariffs announced today, President Trump also announced tariffs on kitchen cabinets and upholstered furniture. What exactly do those products have to do with national security? And is the trade deficit for these products really that big?
For national security, that's an open question. Like, I don't see how the sofa in my living room is a national security threat to the United States. Okay, whatever. It's part of a larger ongoing national security case about lumber. That's how we ended up with these furniture tariffs. There have been complaints, particularly by the kitchen cabinet industry in the United States for a long time about unfair trade practices. They're particularly upset about, for example, imports from Vietnam, which are often cheaper than U.S. domestic kitchen cabinets. And they have now managed to slide cabinets and furniture of all kinds under this sort of tariff investigation on lumber. And so, again, we'll have to see what happens. The net result of that is higher prices for Americans, particularly those trying to remodel a kitchen or build a new house or redecorate their living room or replace, sagging dining room chairs. And so we'll see how long the U.S. public is prepared to pay these significantly higher tariffs. The kitchen cabinet tariff is now apparently going to be at 50% and upholstered furniture at 30%. Those are substantial increases in price and again, driving presumably U.S. inflation figures up.
Thank you, Deborah, for sharing your valuable insights with us. That was Deborah Elms, head of trade policy at the Hinrich Foundation.